In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the front wheel bearing with the hub on this Toyota Matrix. These are located behind your front wheels. To do this job, you will need some specialty tools, and after you're done, you will need an alignment performed on the vehicle. Let's get started.
Use a 21mm socket, remove all 5 lug nuts, and then remove the wheel. Let's remove the tie rod stud from the knuckle. You're going to have a cotter pin. Mine is quite rusted, so I may not be able to remove this. But if you are, typically some cutters is what's going to remove it the easiest, because you can grab onto it and kind of pull it out of here. It looks like mine is going to be stuck in here. So what I can do is, well, I'm going to cut it as flush as I can. And then, oh, it moved. There we go. With some cutters, you can kind of pry it out of its spot. Now, if yours is completely stuck in here and you can't remove it at all, what you can do is just hammer a socket right over it. This is a 17mm mounting nut, so hammer that on and then just remove it and the cotter pin will just break. But in my case, it's out, so take a 17mm socket and let's take the mounting nut off. With it off, put it back on just a few threads so that when we tap the knuckle right here with a hammer and break the stud free, this doesn't fall off completely, but rather gets caught by the nut. Take a hammer and, like I said, tap the knuckle right here. Pay attention not to hit your boot on the tie rod. There we go. Now you can remove the nut the rest of the way. Pull the stud out. Now on the back side of the knuckle, we have 2 17mm bolts that hold the caliper and bracket assembly on the knuckle. We're going to remove both of these. I'm going to remove the caliper, like I said, and bracket as an assembly. Leave this one started in just a little bit so I can hold the caliper while you take the lower one off. All right, remove the top one. Careful pulling your caliper off the rotor. The rotor is most likely going to want to slide off. And then when you have this off, don't hang it by the brake hose, but rather use a bungee cord and support it onto the strut. Take the rotor off. Now use a 30mm 12-point axle nut socket to remove the axle nut. They are fairly tight usually, so if you need to use a large breaker bar to do it, if you don't have a power tool that'll do it, I recommend putting a pry bar between the lug studs that'll hold this from spinning, and you can put some leverage into twisting this off. With that off of here, try to tap the axle inward. This one's free, it can move. Sometimes they seize inside the hub, in which case you'd want to use a center punch and a hammer and tap it through until it moves. Use some rust penetrant if needed. Now use a 22mm socket and wrench to remove the strut bolts that hold that onto the knuckle. I recommend removing the nut side just because it's easier, and then dealing with the bolts later, punching it out that way. That's perfect. Sometimes these seize inside the knuckle so they actually won't spin when you take it off, but that's perfect. I'll leave this in so it can hold the knuckle, and we'll take the lower one off. All right, push them both out and pull the knuckle away. As you do this, keep in mind the axle needs to push back through the hub. You don't want to separate the inner CV joint. Just like this, push the axle aside. We'll go the other way with it because there's more space. And all we have left is the lower ball joint. Now the lower ball joint, you have a couple different ways of disconnecting this. I'm going to try to remove the mounting nut off the stud and leave the ball joint attached to the control arm. This is quite rusty here, but regardless, it has to come off because we have to mount this on the new knuckle. Optionally, if you want to, you can remove the ball joint and the knuckle as an assembly by unbolting it off the lower control arm, but I'm going to go for this method just because I think it can save a step or two. So the cotter pin here is in quite poor condition, so what I'm going to have to do is most likely cut it flush and then hammer a socket right over it. This is going to be a 19mm nut, so we're going to hammer a 19mm socket on here and then take it off. At this point, I'm going to pull up on the knuckle, tap the knuckle right here so it can release the ball joint stud, and this should come right off. Because I have a cotter pin that's now stuck in here, I'm gonna have to punch it out or drill it out with something, so I'm just gonna take a chisel, and I recommend you do the same thing if you have this happen to you, and just try to free it up. And then eventually, if you get to the point where you can drill it out, you can do that as well. Whatever gets it out of here. All right, there we go. Check your cotter pin hole to make sure everything's good. Check the threads. You want to make sure that these didn't get damaged.
Now with our knuckle and wheel bearing and hub assembly on the workbench, we can break free the snap ring that actually locks everything together. So because it's stuck with rust, I'm going to take a screwdriver, you could use a chisel as well, and just hit inward on these two ends to basically pinch it together. But what we're trying to do is break it free from all around here. Also, in addition to that, I will spray some rust penetrant. That should help it as well. There we go, that moved already, so that's good. Perfect. Now that it spins, I can take my snap ring pliers. I know it's not going to be stuck in there, and squeeze the ring and pull it out. Be very careful and gentle, because if these snap ring pliers let go of the ring, it can go flying. Now to finish our job, we're gonna go over to the press. So here's how I have everything set up on the press. I have some spacers here, some supports, and I'm basically holding the knuckle and pressing the hub straight down. Let's apply some pressure and press it out. There we go. There's our hub with the outer race of the bearing, which if you are reusing this hub at this point, you would want to take this off. You can either heat it up until it expands enough and spin the hub like this to make it drop down, or you could cut it, chisel it, whatever the case might be for you. I have a new hub, so I'm not worried about it. At this point, our wheel bearing comes out the back side of the knuckle, but to press on here, we need a race that's flat. So what you can do is punch out the inner race that way, put it up on top, and that'll be your pressing point. There we go. All right, here's the setup for pressing the bearing out. I have some supports here, some spacers, and this is nice and sturdy going straight down. So let's apply some pressure. All right, there it is. There's our wheel bearing. The spacer I was using just fell through. So now we can back this off. While the bearing is out, I want to clean out the groove where the snap ring goes. So the easiest way to do that, for me at least, is a wire wheel on a drill. If you have that, I recommend that you do the same. If not, you could use a wire brush, do it by hand, or even a screwdriver or a pick, and just try to clean all this out. I cleaned up the area of the knuckle where the bearing goes in. This bearing is not directional, so just drop it in. We'll actually use the old bearing to press the new one in, because you don't want to press on the inner race, you want to press on the outer lip. And the easiest way to do that, and to ensure that that happens, is with the old bearing. I cleaned up the old bearing as much as I could. I don't want to press any debris into the new one. We'll line this up, we'll put a spacer here, and apply some pressure and press it in. Oh, that just bottomed out right there. I'll give it one extra pump. That is definitely seated. We'll release the pressure. Take out the old bearing and double check that this is installed correctly, which it is. I can see the entire snap ring groove, so this is ready to go. Before we press in the hub, because it gets pressed this way, I want to ensure that this stays locked in, so let's put in our snap ring. The wheel bearing and hub kit comes with a new snap ring, which is great because a lot of times the old one is not reusable. So we'll squeeze it with our pliers. Just watch your finger when you do this. Seat it in the groove and double check that it is fully seated. If you're using a hydraulic press like me, there are two ways to get the hub back into the knuckle. You could set it here and press the knuckle and bearing onto it, or you could flip this around, support the bearing from the back side, and press the hub down. For me, it's easiest to set it up this way where a spacer is supporting the hub on the inside here. You don't want to press on the studs. Of course, that'll damage them or even press them out. And then I have the knuckle with the bearing in the middle, a spacer adapter here. So you want to support the inner race when you do this, no longer the outer race. You want to make sure that everything stays clamped together. I'm going to be spinning this as I press it down. This will ensure that the bearing itself isn't binding inside from excessive pressure or from the hub going in at an angle. If anything goes in at an angle, stop immediately and correct it, or you will ruin the new parts. So let's put some pressure and install it. That just bottomed out right there. Give it a little bit of extra pressure, ensure that everything spins smoothly, which it does. So release the press. Remove your adapters or spacers. And here is our wheel bearing installed with the hub into the knuckle. At this point, the knuckle is ready to go back on the vehicle.
And place it on the lower ball joint, just like that. Install your mounting nut, and we'll bottom this out. With it snugged up, it's difficult to torque it like this, so what I'm going to do is mount the knuckle at the top back into the strut, but do not put the axle in it, so that you have space here to put a torque wrench. Then you can accurately torque this lower ball joint nut. Then we'll take it back off the strut, put the axle in, and then mount it the rest of the way. Put the two bolts in. All you need to do is have it held in here.
Now with the knuckle mounted, we can much more easily torque this mounting nut, which gets torqued to 76 foot-pounds. Use a 19mm socket on it. We'll snug it up. The knuckle is going to want to spin, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to slide a pry bar right through the center of the hub. Keep in mind it will spin a little bit, so hold it steady, but now you can torque it down. That's it right there. However, just because we reached the torque doesn't mean we're done. This is a castle nut, so you have to look at the slot to make sure it lines up. Mine does not, so I have to keep tightening in order to get this to line up. That looks good right there, so let's put a cotter pin through it. Stick the cotter pin through the hole all the way, and of course on the other side we're going to bend it over to lock it in. However, you want to be very careful for it not to contact the axle at the top. And of course, we're going to cut it to size. This one is quite long. Now let's take the bolts back out of the knuckle so we can tilt it forward and slide the axle in, just like that. Keep the bolts here so that they can be ready to be reattached when the time comes. I have my axle bungee corded so it can be out of my way. I'm going to let it down. And before the axle goes in, I like to cover the splines with either grease or anti-seize. That way they don't get seized inside the knuckle in the future. Just a little bit. You don't need a lot here. All right. Now you take your axle, slide it through the hub, and you might want to spin the hub a little bit just so the splines can line up. And once they do, you'll feel it push in. And now you bring the knuckle up, line it back up with the strut. And this is why I said have the bolts close so you can re-secure it now. Slide them both through. Might as well put the two mounting nuts on at this point. There is no adjustment to this. Some vehicles will sometimes have a camber adjustment here. This one does not, so it wobbles a little bit, which is normal, but you don't have to worry about how to position the bolts. These were the 22mm headed bolts and nuts, so hold the bolt side with the wrench and then push the knuckle in and tighten up the nut. 162 foot-pounds for both of these bolts. As you do this, watch the bolt on the other side, because if it spins, you're going to need to hold it with a wrench, otherwise the torque will not be accurate.
All right, those are torqued. Let's put the axle nut back on. Start it on by hand. I'm going to tighten up with a power tool, but just keep in mind I'm not fully tightening it. I'm just bottoming it out. It is important to torque these to spec. That's it. Now torque it to 159 foot-pounds. In order to stop the hub from spinning as I torque this, I'm going to use a pry bar, put it flat right between the studs, and that's going to prevent it from spinning. It's important that it doesn't sit sideways because it can damage the threads like that. That's it right there. Remove your tools, and now we have to stake the axle nut in. That's how it gets locked. You can easily do that with a chisel or a punch and a hammer. Just tap it down in the center. That's pretty good right there. You don't need to smash it down completely. Just pin it over so that it can't loosen up by itself if it ever wants to. I'm going to put some anti-seize on the surface of the hub. This will prevent corrosion from building up in the future. Now you don't want a lot on here because if you do put too much, when you put the rotor on, especially once the wheel goes on and squishes it, all the anti-seize that is extra will squish out and start flinging all over the inside of the rotor. So just a thin layer will protect it from corrosion. Go around the center of the hub right here as well. And the rotor shouldn't seize on, corrosion shouldn't build for a long time. Now install the rotor. Just a quick tip, if you have a lug nut handy, put this on so the rotor doesn't move around. Now grab your caliper and put the pads over the rotor as well as the whole caliper assembly, of course. Try to line it up with the two mounting holes, and you want to have your bolts handy so that as soon as it does line up, you can at least start one of them in to hold it on. Start the other one in. Let's bottom both of these out. $79 foot-pounds on both of these bolts. There's one. And the second one. Now put the tie rod through the knuckle and the mounting nut back on top of it. We'll bottom this out. 36 foot-pounds is the torque for this tie rod stud. Now that is torqued, but once again, this is a castle nut. It looks like my slot lines up perfectly, so that's good. But if yours does not, always continue tightening these and not loosen, no matter how close it is. Install your new cotter pin, and of course, we're going to bend it over to lock it in. There we go. If you wanted to, you could trim off the excess on the ends. Our particular vehicle does not have ABS, so there's nothing for me to mount here. If yours does, you would have already taken the ABS sensor out of the old knuckle, so you would remount it to the new knuckle. But if you don't have ABS, that's okay. This opening doesn't lead to anywhere that should be sealed up, so if it stays here as is, that's no problem. Let's get the wheel back on. Start on all 5 lug nuts, bottom them out in a cross pattern, and also in a cross pattern, torque them to 76 foot-pounds. 76 foot-pounds in a cross pattern, here we go. Double check them. There you have it. Take it for a road test and don't forget to get an alignment.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.